In 1999, Valkyrie Studios released Septerra Core, a game that would eventually become the very definition of a cult classic for both its dystopian sci-fi world as well as its intriguing mix of RPG mechanics and adventure game progression. Unfortunately, Valkyrie Studios would not survive to see this come to pass, so this became our only foray into the layered world of Septerra and its sister planets. And the question is, was it a good game worth the cult classic status, or was it just another underperformer loved for nostalgic reasons? Now, due to it being flanked by so many exceptional releases ranging from Nocturne to Baldur's Gate, and that's just in the RPG space, you'd be hard-pressed to find many who played this on release. But rather, most people I know, myself included, would discover this gem at a later date. In my case, as part of a $5 bargain bundle paired with Shogo Armored Division. That didn't even include the manuals for either game. And my initial impressions back then were pretty good, since it had a really cool combat system, an intriguing world composed of actual physical layers of haves and have-nots, a flexible magic system, voice acting, and even pretty good cinematics for the day. Though them being in QuickTime did make it a bit of a nightmare to show off on our streams of the game, and for casual play I would absolutely recommend some of the fan patches and conversions for the cinematics, which are generally easier to get set up on the GOG version, but can still work on Steam as well. The only major drawbacks I had with the game back in the day were basically a mix of flaws in my playstyle, such as just not being able to balance my mana usage very well, and the game unfortunately bringing a small dose of the adventure game obtuse clue system with it for progression, which is basically where it has you doing the whole get X, Y, and Z items and combine them to make the key item for progression. So having a guide on hand for stream was pretty much necessary at some points for me, since I probably would not have remembered to go back to a random hole in the wall with a pickaxe several hours after seeing it, or known to click on this very specific location on screen. Now, as far as the game itself, I'm actually glad I returned to it on stream and ended up finishing it this time, albeit with a little bit of help from those guides, since there's a lot more cool stuff that I had never gotten to experience before with the game's world, and I can see why people swear by it to this day. Starting with the mechanics, so we can push the spoilers to the end, the combat at first glance will look very similar to jRPGs of the time, in spite of it being made by a Western studio, but this starts to break apart as soon as you get your hands on it. This is because it modifies most of the mechanics to make combat much more fluid and give you more risk versus reward options. Instead of standard active turn-based battles of the time, we instead have a tiered meter system. Wait for a character to get 1 pip on their bar and they can use low-end skills, 2 pips for mid-power skills, or 3 pips for their high-end skills. And these are mostly unique to each character, with some of the overlap functionality being power differences. For example, Grub's repair skill is a tier 2 one, which heals a decent chunk of health for mechanical allies or damages mechanical enemies for a decent amount as well, while Lead's repair skill is 1 cost, so it's faster to use, but it heals and harms significantly less. This kind of thing runs true for most of the characters in the game, with skill unlocks for these being tied to accessories you can find or buy throughout the game and attached to gear slots specifically for them. While basic attacks just require filling up the bar, a lot of the other skills end up needing what is called core energy, which is basically the universal mana pool for your entire party. In the beginning of the game, both this pool and what you can do with it is going to be fairly limited, since you'll only get access to additional spells and items by progressing the story and exploring new areas, rather than through level ups. So for a while, you'll pretty much just be using it for grenades, repairs, and casting basic versions of the spells, which might lead some people to being underwhelmed with the magic system, especially on a first glance. Though, as you progress through the game, the real interesting aspect of the spells starts to reveal itself, since you gather more cards, which serve as your spell pool and its modifiers. So starting out, you might just have Maya or Grub casting a heal on a single target with the Kira card, or using a water spell to damage somebody. But later on, you'll be casting spells using all 3 characters of the active party at once, and having them combine card functions that can let you summon everything from black holes to the gods of the elements themselves, which do have some fun animations too. And later on, as you get better gear, more party members, and just access to more and better recovery items and money, you'll be able to spam these much more. This does have the nice effect of really letting you experience both the more basic attacks, as well as the more big and grandiose attacks throughout the game. Though I do feel like we never get to see a spot where most of the gear-based skills get to shine, outside of a select few that we use while waiting to find the Effect All card. Septerra Core also allows for one more thing I actually love in RPGs that sci-fi RPGs usually don't do, and that's the offensive use of healing skills. And while the most obvious use of it is going to be on stuff like zombies, floating skulls, etc., the undead that you just might encounter in certain areas of the game, if you're willing to experiment, you can definitely find unexpected enemies prone to this tactic as well, making the healing items orders of magnitude more effective at killing some enemies than even your spells or attacks, especially for some of the optional content in the game. Equipment also plays a fairly decent role in how effective your characters are. Even though at first it may seem like it only causes minor shifts, later on it absolutely can define whether you are using a character as a speed demon to get early hits, or whether you're letting them be slow in exchange for greater tankiness or damage. Generally, early on I preferred the latter, since enemies could take a little bit to kill in the early game, but later on when we had access to more devastating abilities, speed quickly became the king for decimating enemies. This also made grinding easier, and even though it was unnecessary, I did want to do it so I could purchase and try all of the optional pieces of equipment and smooth out the stream sessions, since most of my grinding was done while I was rendering videos between streams and couldn't do anything else with my system. The grinding also weirdly drew attention to an odd design decision. The characters almost all level at different rates, but can stay similar in power in spite of their different specialties. Now, as far as the progression mechanics, this is admittedly not nearly as obtuse as stuff like King's Quest or Monkey Island. But there are a few points where you'll kind of be shaking your head, such as needing to grab a leaf or place a mirror, taking a pickaxe to a random place on the map like we mentioned earlier, though with that last one, you do get a character that can sniff out where you need to go, and really, most of the progress will just be made by exploring the world and going forward with the story. That said, this still is the reason why I would absolutely recommend having a guide at hand for this, so just in case you get stuck wondering how to get something to happen, you can have that little bit of a backup to find the necessary MacGuffin, or in a couple cases even know where to purchase certain quest items like a mixing bowl or some earplugs. Not to mention, a guide can be semi-helpful whenever it comes to getting the ultimate gear, since it requires finding a bunch of birds on random maps throughout the entire game, and this can save you a lot of backtracking to seemingly useless paths to collect them all, and it will usually also warn you of the rare but still present diversions into extremely high-level areas you can find if you're a player that explores just a little too much. Though, personally, I didn't mind exploring these areas, since it let me see the full variety of enemies in the game, which, while not as expansive as, say, a Final Fantasy game, were still enough to really give each area its distinct flavor, with human enemies and dogs in built-up civilized areas, more organic and natural enemies in more wild areas, and even fairly unique bosses throughout that really fit their themes. Now, normally I would not be so hesitant about loading up some of the spoilers in these nostalgia bait videos, since they are meant as a retrospective on relatively old games, but I do think that Septerra Core's story is best experienced without spoilers of what lies ahead, and thankfully most guides on it take the same philosophy. So you have been warned, there be spoilers ahead, even if I am trying to keep them more subdued. Now, while we are introduced to the nature of the shells of Septerra really early on with its individual shells, cultures, etc. in the opening cinematics, as well as the actual pivotal action at play before we even see our protagonist, the start of the game kind of dives down much more on a personal level, and really gives you a glimpse into the lives of the starting characters, and even does the same later on with most of the 9 traveling companions you'll end up getting through the story, though obviously Maya, your character, will get most of the attention. She basically starts out witnessing a foreboding situation, which is chosen ships above the desert, which we'll quickly learn is how Maya and her little brother became orphans. People seem concerned, but unsure of what to do, and that I can totally understand since the Chosen of Shell 1 are easily one of the most technologically advanced cultures in all of Septerra, and rarely leave the top shell, much less start a descent to the depths of the core. Maya, being one of the more curious characters as well as being headstrong and protective of others, quickly begins the path of adventure on a few fronts thanks to this encounter with the Chosen, as well as the shady actions of her little brother dragging her into questionable encounters, and her unwillingness to see unjust behavior of a certain mayor harm her hometown or her adoptive uncle. The mechanic Grub and his machine pet Runner are the first companions you'll meet and will travel with you most of the rest of the story. Grub feels like the insert of a socially awkward tech guy, and his awkwardness absolutely carries throughout the rest of the story, though with the right decisions you can find him at least someone who shares his interest in big wrenches and technology. Runner, on the flip side, is a much more sentient robot than most you'll encounter, with a few exceptions. While he cannot communicate like the worker bots, his pet-like behavior was so well done that it actually inspired an entire artificer for me in one of the D&D campaigns I played, and still keep in my folders, of course. He is easily one of the slowest party members in combat, but is extremely strong and will often fit the loyal hound trope throughout the entire story without feeling overly cliché. The ultimate pivot point, though, is experiencing the shady encounter with your little brother trying to sell contraband to the other shells. You'll get sucked into all kinds of trouble and issues and run into 6 characters with similarly developed personalities as the 3 we already mentioned, and all of them will take you on a journey to the shells below, learning of the treachery of the Chosen in their pursuit of power, and you'll be fed all these little pieces as you go deeper, piece by piece, in addition to a handful of above-board cutscenes that will set the overall atmosphere of the world. You'll get embroiled in a fight to liberate a kingdom from the Chosen, you'll get stuck in the middle of a civil war between the second most technologically advanced societies on a given shell, with that culminating in literally pieces of one shell being slammed into the underside of another. You'll discover lost civilizations and even species. You'll even meet other sentient robots, bandits, slavers, and heck, even recruit a Chosen to your side. While doing all this, the characters will get pulled away and added in as appropriate, and you'll even have to deal with in-party conflicts like those between Corgan, the Holy Guard from Shell 3, and Selena, the Chosen recruit that Corgan hates for good reasons. Which I should add, if you don't do a certain side quest, they will continue to beat the ever-living crap out of each other randomly up until the end of the game. They obviously aren't the only interpersonal quest though, since you can get special attacks from one character combo as another more well-known example. And while the Corgan and Selena rivalry can get very irritating, I think all of this does add to the unique feel of each character, and I never felt like any of the characters were just set dressing. Heck, even towards the end, the characters actually split up based on their specialties and needs, so you'll get the experiences all of their strengths and weaknesses as you travel through the late game dungeons, getting specific dialogue for each group. On top of this, as you play through the game, you'll get special dialogue based on who you have in the party at the time, some of it even giving you access to unique side quests. So if you need a snobby asshole to get something done, bring Selena. Needs something fixed, bring Lead or Grub, etc. This all giving a nice utility to every character both in and outside of battle, and that's something very few RPGs do, and even less do well. I think, weirdly enough, Breath of Fire 2 is probably the one that came closest, and even then it didn't have this level of nuance for quests or dialogue options, since, yes, you can have each of your party members interact with the NPCs on an individual level to get different responses too. The story uses this to help ebb and flow through stress and triumph, including some frankly really dark scenes, fully voice acted to boot, that wouldn't be out of place in more edgy genres, though thankfully it never gets nearly as graphic as what you'd expect in games like, say, Resident Evil. The musical score helps drive these home too, with really impeccable music for the scenes, which, yes, if you're wondering, it was indeed 2 of the people who did the soundtrack for Halo as well, if you're wondering what kind of atmosphere to expect. I think my only real complaint about the story is the ending, and not in the way of disliking or even looking down on it, but rather, I like the ending, I'm just still wondering the fate of a specific character, because it seems like it was distinctly vague on that point. Though admittedly, it doesn't really harm the experience of the closing story, it just leaves it confusing for me. And overall, I really enjoyed returning to Septerra Core, and while it does have its rough patches here and there, the experience as a whole more than makes up for it, and definitely made sure it held its place as deserving of the cult classic label. And I can, without a doubt, recommend it to RPG fans of the era. So, are there any games that defined your childhood or that you missed out on until way later? Mention them down below and we might end up streaming them or even giving them a nostalgia bait of their own.